And I was like one of the only brown kids in this little town outside of Richmond. I remember like first day of school. This like I'm like not even joking that this actually happened. Like a bunch of like white kids, like they were like, "Oh, ching chong chong jing," and I was like, "What?" And I knew that they were making fun of me, but I didn't know what that meant. You know?
Welcome to Creative Leadership with Heart, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of creative leadership. I'm your host, Rico Nasol. Join me as we explore the impact of heart-centered leadership in today's creative and design organizations. All right, welcome back to Creative Leadership with Heart. I have Rom Alejandro here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'm glad we were able to connect. He is a senior editor at Masterclass. He's also a filmmaker, freelance editor, and writer-director. Welcome, Rom, to the podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, man. This is so cool. Really happy to support you and everything you do, and just have like a really cool conversation.
Sweet, right on. So just to start, just going to jump right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as a creative in tech, Hollywood, and now is Masterclass considered ed tech? I think it's considered ed tech.
I think it is ed tech. I mean, they're based
Yeah.
out of San Francisco, so I think of them as a startup kind of company.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what was it that got you into creative and AV and filmmaking?
I mean, my story starts with like a lot of creatives, I think, in high school, like my younger years. I had a best friend in high school, and he had like a digital camera and one of those ones that like you would put on a hard disk. Remember, there's like 3.5-inch floppy disks. So you can only record like 15 seconds at a time. And we were just bored one day at the beach, didn't have anything to do. And he was like, "Hey, I got this camera. Let's like make a movie." And we made this movie called Asian Hoop Dreams, which was like a spoof of me trying to become an NBA basketball player to play with Kobe Bryant. So that dream never happened, obviously. But it was just something that he and I could do and connect over, sort of like project based. We would do things a lot in the summers or on breaks and stuff. And I just really had a great time being friends with somebody and having a project to work on. So that was sort of the impetus of it. And then in college is when I started sort of thinking of it seriously, filmmaking and movies in general. I became like a cinephile. I took a lot of classes, and I made a lot of short films with a professor named Kevin Everson. He's like a very famous experimental filmmaker at the University of Virginia. So I went there, and they didn't really have a film program, but I had a lot of, I was sort of like a in the filmmaking club, which is like an alternative to the Greek society there. So I was like surrounded by my friends and could make movies and stuff, and really like found my place there, and made some short films. One of them actually, in a weird way, got some buzz. No, I wouldn't say buzz, but just got noticed because it won a film festival, and I was a little write up in Variety, and I had a couple producers from LA, like who were alumni at UVA, like hit me up, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm famous!" So I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna go to Cal Arts." So I got into Cal Arts, but turns out that's very expensive. So I moved out to LA anyways, and just started working. That's how I got out here. So, and then since then, I kind of just jumped around. Like the whole goal was to be an independent filmmaker, but at that time, I remember there was the writer's strike and a whole bunch of other things happened. So I kind of fell into more like post-production, documentary, went to reality TV, went to like educational courseware, made some stuff with like Robot Chicken, did all kinds of animation stuff, and eventually landed over at Netflix, where I learned how to cut trailers, and that's where we met. So that's kind of like a quick overview, but a lot of meandering steps to get to where I'm at right now.
Was there a moment in time where you're like, this is what I want to do, right? Was it like making the short films on the beach, or was it when you're like, in a class being like realizing what this is like and being into it? Was there that moment for you?
Yeah, there were three movies that I saw in college. One was Mean Streets by Scorsese. It was David Gordon Green's All the Real Girls, and Bernardo Bertolucci's oh my god, I'm blanking on the name of it. The Conformist. And those movies, I was just like, oh my gosh, you can make movies that are like, personal, and kind of, just had this sort of auteur type of thing. I just learned about like the auteur. Oh yeah, the 400 Blows was also another one. But I was like, I guess you can do that as a filmmaker and sort of have that personal expression. So I was like, if I could do that for a living, I think that would, and do that with my friends too, because I listened to a lot of like the DVD commentary, and it seemed like all those people were making things with their collaborators that they had known for a while and were very close. So that excited me, and that's kind of where I came at it from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. And we talked a little bit about this, even taking a few more steps back, right? We talked a little bit about before we hit record in the pre-show. You and I are both first generation Filipino-American.
Kababayan!
Yeah, for sure. And it's yeah, I mean, it's something that you and I have had a lot of conversations about in
Yeah.
general, like things we've seen, things we've done, how we help support our community. So a couple things. Well, how was that growing up? Because I think you grew up in the South,
Yeah.
right? So what was your childhood like, and how did that shape you as a person you are today and as a creative?
Yeah, I grew up outside of Richmond, Virginia, which a lot of people sometimes were like, "That's not the South." I'm like, "It was the capital of the Confederacy," and I grew up in a place called Short Pump, because at the time when I grew up there, it was pretty small. It had like one little intersection that had like a very short pump where you would like water your horse or whatever, like when you're going between Richmond and Charlottesville. So it was kind of small.
Hmm.
And that was like the first day of school, and it's almost comical to me because like that kind of thing seems like if you saw it in a movie, you'd be like, "Ah, come on, like seriously." But it was very like that was the first thing that I remember with school. So I always had this, um, intersection between, uh, you know, being in a predominantly like white area and, kind of feeling like an outsider. But I I think a lot of that and how it sort of informs what I love, um, and how I reacted to a lot of that was I learned to love all aspects of all the good things, right? Like I love the South, um, and like I love being on the water. I love fishing. I love the way people talk. I love the food. That is like inherently part of me. And at the same time, I'm also there's that duality of feeling like of being like Filipino and being like proud of my background and our food and the dances. Like I did all the dances like to Nickling and the coconut dance, and then really celebrating that stuff and how to sometimes reconcile those two things, you know. Um, and the way that comes out for me is like I love like mashups of all kinds of things, of all kinds of cultures. One example, like for the films that I've made films in like Russian and Pashto, which is like a language from Afghanistan, in Spanish and French, um, and I love mixing genres. Like one of my favorite bands is Krungbin. You know that band?
Mm-hmm.
They're like people these like people from Texas, and they do like psychedelic surf music from Thai psychedelic surf music.
Wow.
You know, so it's
Talk
like
about a matchup.
yeah, it's a great match. It's super. I mean, like out here, I feel like if you can't go into a coffee shop without listening to them in LA. So like I love these things that where you would take things that don't seem like they were together necessarily, and then you find a way to make it work. And so I think that that has informed my creative process, and also um, like the actual like things that I like.
Hmm.
I love European cinema. I love Asian cinema. I love it when like people from those countries come over here and make movies. I think those are always the best films, you know. Um, so I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's about how how you grew up, right, and what
yeah,
influenced you. And one thing I also wanted to get into were, and you mentioned a little bit, but just what are some of the things that maybe, I don't want to use held you back because I don't think held you back is a good way to say it. But what are some of the struggles that you had to face growing? Because I grew up
yeah.
in the Bay Area, which is like the highest concentration of Filipinos
Sure.
outside of the Philippines, right? So I have a much different experience.
Yeah.
Most of the things that you talk about, I experienced when I would leave the Bay Area
Mm.
and go to different places, right? And also I experienced it in other ways.
Did you
Um,
guys speak Tagalog in your family, or was it like in the Bay Area?
No, we
No.
didn't. We
Okay.
didn't because my parents didn't want to hold us back in any way,
Yeah.
like because back then, right, I'm gonna date myself, but like in the 70s and 80s, right? Um, things like you mentioned were prominent in schools. Like if they didn't know what you were, they thought all Asians were Chinese,
Yep.
right? Even so much so when I was working at Zappos and I would go to different parts of the country, everyone thought I was Mexican. Um,
Yeah,
And they're
I get
like,
that too
"Oh,
for
yeah, I know
sure.
all the Mexicans in this area." I'm like, I'm Filipino." And so I had to have to kinda not be offended because I was a manager, but then also, like, educate at the same time,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah,
So
I would say a couple of things that even from what you're talking about. One, still same thing, Tagalog. Uh, spoke it growing up, but then once we got to school, they were like, your kids are gonna get confused, right? So immediately it was like, and gosh, it's so sad because now if I could speak Tagalog to my kid, I would totally do that, you know.
mhm,
Um, and that kind of continued throughout my elementary school and middle school experience. I remember one of the big things for me as a uh, in elementary school, I was in like the same classes as like gifted kids or whatever, but they never classified me as gifted, right? And I remember I was like, I used to like do a lot of, I did really very well in those classes, right? And I didn't quite understand it at the time. Like later on, my dad talked to me about it, but I remember like looking at a photograph of my classmates and being like, I'd be like the only brown face in there, and I'd be like, why do I look so different from everyone? I don't feel that much different, and how come I'm not being classified in the same category as my peers? Um, and I think that that was just like in what we would say now is like that was just like an unconscious bias on the part of schools, like and um, but for me, I remember I was sitting on the curb. I was like in fifth grade, and I was like bummed because if you were in a gifted class, you could then go into other gifted classes, right? Like there's a
mhm.
trajectory there. I remember feeling really bummed about that because my sister was like fantastic at school. She's like 2 years older than me, and she was like always great at it. Um, and I felt like I didn't get the opportunities. Uh, but I was, in fifth grade, I was sitting on the curb with my dad, and I had known that my sister was applying to this thing called like the governor's school, which was like kind of a magnets program. Um, and I told him that I was going to get into that school, that I could do the same things that my sister did, even though I wasn't like classified um, uh, in the same way that she was. And like 3 years later, I was like proud to say that like because they do like rankings, I was like the number one ranked kid to get into that high school from that county. And so it sort of lit a fire under me to sort of have that chip on your shoulder to always prove yourself. And I think that like that continued on. I mean, through to this day. I mean, I think all minorities have that sort of feeling that you kind of have to do a little bit more. You have to be like that star um, in order to get, you know, recognition. I mean, I remember too in uh, at school, the way that I would get friends is I would try to do well at school, so that people would be like in my group project, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe this is sort of just like a very like Asian American kind of experience, but um, you know, it's like socially, I wouldn't always like be able to interact with everybody because we didn't always like watch the same movies, or I wouldn't always have the same kind of clothing, or I definitely ate weird food at lunch, you know. But when people would get together and you got to choose your group project, the people that were in your group project, I would always be like, oh, I want to work, you know, in the group, like, oh, I want to work with Rom, right? Because folks wanted a good grade. Um, and I didn't realize that, you know, until afterwards, that like that ends up kind of getting into your psyche of like, oh, my worth, my value is actually to perform in a certain way, to get good grades, to be smart, you know, and all those sort of stereotypes of being the model minority, and also, and you know, that also sort of, I think, ties in with that whole model minority thing of like, oh, I wouldn't speak up, you know, a lot because I didn't want to rock the boat, and I wanted people to like me, especially in
Mm-hmm.
group projects and stuff. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the stuff, same stuff that I struggle with. And I think you're right. Like a lot, I don't want to broad stroke paint it, but I do work with a lot of minorities, and these are the themes that people work through. I think it's minorities and underrepresented groups tend to have this mindset where if I say something and people don't like it, then they're not going to like me. And if they don't like me, then I don't like myself. Like just a whole
Yeah.
perpetual thing, right? And so it's important for us, especially as underrepresented groups, to know our worth, know our value, do the work that we need to do to kind of break some of those stereotypes. And some of them, you know, were just signs of the times, right? So like I
Mm-hmm.
know my parents now, they're so much more supportive of me being outspoken and being like the one that does rock the boat. But growing up,
Right.
that wasn't the thing. It was like work hard, go to school, get good grades, get a job, as any
Yes.
job you want, as long as it's doctor, lawyer,
Yeah.
nurse,
The nurse.
right? Um, or go to the military, right?
Yeah.
And keep it, right? So I've even seen their, and they came here with $50
Right.
and my brother, and like just hope. So I give them tons of credit and tons of props for how they, what they did with their lives and how they raised us. But they did the best that they could, and I appreciate them for that. And what comes with that is the times that we grew up in, and we just have to know that things are getting better. There's
Mm-hmm.
still a long way to go for like our kids, right? But
Yeah.
it is getting better.
Yeah, it is getting better. And one thing that I think is interesting, even from what you were saying there, is like being a first generation person, like how that, at least for me, how that impacted some of the decisions I made to kind of honor my parents as well. You know, like they didn't have a lot when they got here. And I was thinking about like when I went to the Philippines and I would see like, you know, the town that my dad's from, like Isabela, and there's it's like small town, and some of the, he would talk about these like, you know, these huts with like bamboo floors, and a snake would pop up. And you know, you see those things, you know,
Hmm.
when you go and you're like, oh my god, this is like third world, dude. like like you are like an astronaut basically. You got to live this middle class life in America, and like how can I not honor that? And in some ways, the best way for me to honor that is not necessarily like doing the doctor, lawyer. And no, if you do those things, that's great. Like, but for me, like I had to follow in many of the same ways like my parents followed, like um, a path that would prove to be the most successful, and that was doing something creative, and do those things, take advantage of those opportunities that maybe they didn't get to have take advantage of. You know,
Hmm.
like my mom is a very creative person. She like she writes a lot. I got her that, you know, that thing Storyworth. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
So I got her Storyworth, and she basically my sister and I did, um, and she wrote like a 2 volume set of her life. You know, she just has like a creative uh, sort of spirit, and I think that maybe, you know, if she had the opportunities that I had, maybe she would have done something creative as well. Um, so I think of that. I sort of think about that, sort of like what's the best way to honor your parents' struggles. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's 100%. I don't know if I was this on another podcast, but I actually used their struggle to help them see my perspective, right? Because I wanted
Mm,
to not do something traditional and I wanted to go away for college.
mm,
And they were like, no, you can go to San Jose State or like UC Berkeley, that's here, it's local. And I told them, look, you were supposed to be teaching. Like my mom was supposed to be a teacher, and my dad was supposed to be a farmer because that's what their family history.
right.
That's like my Lola and Lolo were teachers and farmers and all that stuff, and that's what they're supposed to be. But they said no, I want something different. I want something better. So like I wanted to your vein to honor them by saying you did so much. My parents did so much to give us an opportunity to do the things that we wanted to do to have a better life. And so this is me taking advantage of the struggles that you went through and let me find my way just like you took a chance and found your way,
Yeah.
right? And so like, I admit when I was first graduating, I was scared, so I was going to be either a music teacher or like an engineer because your parents are like, oh, make sure you're secure, you have a good job, and so that's what I thought it meant. And the more I started to take those classes, the more I started to do, the less I wanted to do it.
Right.
um, and when I really found what I wanted to do was I wanted to be a promoter and an editor. I just followed that and I used their story as my inspiration to follow that,
Yeah.
right? And they allowed me the privilege to chase after something different, just like they went against their parents to chase something different. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I'm so happy that when I started talking about films and movies and stuff, that my parents were excited about that as well. You know, so thankfully, you know, they had the maybe I wonder if that's like a if that generate if that's a common story of create like Filipino creatives, like, oh, apparently my parents actually liked it. You know, but good for them. Kudos for both our parents for seeing that in us.
yeah, absolutely. I want to transition into some more stuff that you're doing now. So you've
Oh,
done a
hey,
lot.
before you do that, can I
Oh
just
yeah,
say one thing,
sure.
since we're just before we transition away from the Filipino
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
I might have said this to you before, but it was a huge thing for me to go to Netflix and see like a male Filipino, like a man, Filipino man, be the boss of a bunch of bosses. I don't know if I ever told that to you, but like just like seeing somebody that looked like me, that had the um, the kind of like approach that I could identify with, you know. I mean, you know, you talk about like having heart and like leading with heart and stuff, and I feel like that is a very sort of Filipino way of going about things. Um, Sort of seeing that and being like, oh, like I don't have to conform necessarily to what have seen. I could be my own person um, and be successful. I had never seen that before, you know, and so it was a revelation for me. And so I've always, you know, I latched onto that, and always have thought of you as a mentor in that respect. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you. Um, yeah, I mean that's just the way. I think there has to be a balance. There's definitely, especially in a place like Netflix, there's definitely enough head centered leaders.
Sure.
Um, and for me, balance. It's all about balance, right? And people being themselves and who they are, and being them. They're allowing for them to be their best selves. So hopefully that's my philosophy. Hopefully that's the environment I created for you all. and you all did amazing work. It was easy. So it wasn't a difficult thing. You all made it easy. Um, but thank you for that, Rom.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, getting back into some of the stuff you've done. So you've done a lot. You've done documentaries, you've done short films, you've done marketing work, you've done trailer work, social, like all kinds of stuff. What is the inspiration behind your work and what you do?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Um, oh gosh, the inspiration. I mean, I would say that like, well, first off, not everything that you work on is going to be like the thing that like you align with creatively, right? Um, so especially when it comes to like marketing and advertising and commercials, I think it's really important for people to remember that those things are different from films and art, and that's commercials and marketing and all that stuff. So all that commercials, marketing, branding, that's actually there because you have to motivate people to do something, either click this thing or go to the movie or buy whatever. Um, so the creative behind it, you kind of have to find the like the thing that is that will motivate, like that's actually exists in the piece, um, that motivates somebody to go out and do that action. Sometimes it's harder than most when it's something that I align with creatively. I find that it's usually something kind of inspirational, kind of transformative. I really love like sports, for instance, because there's usually some kind of struggle there where someone is like has overcome either an opponent or their own physical limitations and kind of transcended the sport in a way. Um, and you can find that sort of like idea of transcendence in like a lot of the things that I've worked on, whether it be in sports or design or art or just like a character that is learning about themselves. Right. Those are the things that I gravitate towards, um, because I think that those are just the kinds of creative that I like to watch myself.
Yeah.
So when I feel like inspired to do something, um, uh, it's because I just personally like relate to it. Um, so so yeah, I don't know if there's uh, that feels kind of like a general answer, but I think that personal, I had to connect with a piece personally, um, in order for me to like do well with it.
Hmm.
And if I don't, um, a lot of times it ends up being button pushing, and I know it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and I had to have like a lot of conversations with people about like, okay, what is this thing, and like how do I find that emotional aspect to it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's true. If you want someone to do their best work, they should feel inspired and motivated around it, right? And it is you're right, it's often hard as a creative to find that thing. So yeah, like you said, when it's something you connect with, it's easy with sports or like for me, it's like music and something like that. If it's something inspiration or just stories of like struggles, like I connect with those things. But then when you're talking about commercials or like ads, um, sometimes
Yeah.
it's just about finding connecting with like why is this important to this person, what kind of transformation will this person get, and that's a great word that you use, transformational. Like what kind of transformation is this person going to get by clicking on the thing, buying the thing, watching the thing, experiencing the thing? And is that an like how can I connect to that transformation as opposed to like just it's a widget, like I
Right.
don't care about widgets, but the widget is going to make this person unlock their true potential. That's the thing we get behind, right? And it almost starts to dovetail, like we talked about this in the pre-show, with the book recommendation you have, because
Oh
I've
yeah.
used that same book in ways to create that connection. So you want to share the book?
Yes.
Yeah.
That book is called, let's see, I have it actually right here. Archetypes and Branding. Um, I should get a sponsorship deal from these
Yeah,
folks.
but you would have got commission from me for sure.
um, it's a book actually. So I have some friends from Richmond. You know, the great thing about growing up in Richmond is it's like a very like creative community. There's a VCU, and there's an advertising program there, branding program. And so I was turned on to this thing by a couple of my friends who do branding for a living. And basically, what it is, it has a bunch of archetypes, and there's these like cards that come with it. They're sort of like tarot cards almost. Um, and the idea behind it is that there's when you're thinking about branding and commercials and things like that, you're trying to distill what can be a complicated story down to something that like everyone knows, and usually that can be considered like an archetype, not a stereotype, but an archetype. Um, I think in the book they say that stereotypes close options, and archetypes open them
Hmm.
for people. But I you can go through this book and learn about the different types of the different archetypes, and you can apply them to the things that you're creating. So you can say, for instance, like, oh, the movie that I'm working on, the main character is this archetype. So if I had to tell that person's story in like 30 seconds, then they have to adhere to the archetype, and usually that's pretty self-explanatory within the film itself, right? Because they've put a lot of time and effort into that creative. But you want to identify that for yourself too, so that you don't cut something out that is necessary for telling that story. What the other thing you can do too is you can be like, well, what is the audience, the audience expecting? Is the audience are the audience? I just pulled this card. So this is the idealists, right? So is your audience a bunch of people who are idealists? And if so, what does that mean? On the back of this card it says a belief in the possibility of change, strong vision and work ethic towards the greatest common good, cooperation and collaboration, authenticity, altruism, self-confidence, you know, and I'll use that. I mean, this is very sort of like masterclass, right? Um, I'll use that to just give me like a guidepost as to like who I'm making this thing for. Yeah, I love what you're saying about like thinking about the audience and how this is landing and how it can be something can be transformational for them. Um, that's definitely something that I think is core to what we're doing over at Masterclass. Um, and I think it also sort of speaks to anything that's sort of altruistic for myself, as a creative, is like, oh, maybe I'm like contributing to people's or not just society in some way, or people's experience, that they can watch this thing that I'm working on or promoting and find some kind of transformational change. But this just makes it easier to figure those things out, and it gives you a way to also talk about it with other people, have a
Hmm.
little bit of the same language as you're collaborating. Um, and I love it. I don't use it as much as I used to because I kind of digested it well enough that I can kind of figure it out on my own, and make some of those decisions. But before Netflix, I hadn't really cut a lot of trailers and marketing things, so it was a really great guide for me to go from like documentaries and indie films, which can be very like sometimes delve deep into very like complicated subjects, and sometimes in the first things I cut, I would be like, oh, this is very complicated. I would get a lot of feedback like, oh, this is like too heady, and what this does is like it helps me distill it down to like, oh, like you watch the first 15 seconds of this thing, and that is, that is a funny clown archetype,
Right.
you know. Um, uh, yeah, you can use it for brainstorming. You can use it for analyzing something. It's great. It sounds like you've been using it too, so
Yeah,
that's good.
absolutely. It's we use the that book and then a similar exercise to do a branding exercise in my last company
Mm,
where we came up with the personality types which are based on archetypes, which was kind, curious, confident, and irreverent, right? And so like that puts a sort of personality,
Mm,
targeted personality to your brand and your audience. So now that's your voice. That's like the lens you use for any creative is, does it hit these four things? Is it a little bit irreverent? If it's too serious, then like
right.
we weren't the academic ed tech company. We were the fun ed tech company. So if it was too serious, we're like, we're not Harvard,
Right.
we're out school.
Right.
So like that, it's a great guideline. And even when I work with other coaching clients around some of their branding work, I can tell if they've done this exercise or not, because is the audience defined? Is the personality defined? What's it like to go to dinner with your brand? And they have
Mm,
no idea. I'm like, probably some more work that you need to do, because that is for me, that's a great barometer of how strong is your brand. What would it be like to go to dinner with your brand? What would that experience be like?
I
Right?
love that idea.
Yeah. So
Uh,
like, yeah, we did it on Netflix, and I forgot the third, but it was like pioneering, welcoming, and something else. So like, if you sat down to dinner with Netflix, they'd be welcoming, but they'd probably talk to you about all the crazy new stuff that they want to invent.
yeah.
Right?
And they would over order.
Yeah, and they definitely over. Um, okay, I know we're coming at time. I have a couple more questions I want to get.
Yeah.
Now it's more kind of getting into advice stage.
Sure.
So, knowing what you know now, what is a piece of advice you'd give somebody wanting to get into creative? Or another way you can take it is, what advice would you give like the 15, 20-year-old Rom, knowing
Yeah.
what you know now?
Yeah. I mean, this goes back to a little bit of what we're talking about, even with sort of like the Asian American experience of like having to find your self-worth in the thing that you're doing. And I would tell myself that you aren't, you're not, you aren't your work, right? Your work, your job is not you. And it just took me a long time to figure that out. That your value is not um, what your career is, what your job is. Um, and it's really important actually to find out that you yourself are worth something um, outside of the success or the accolades or the work that you're putting out. Um, and if you're searching for that validation in um, your job and your career, then it's going to probably not lead to to great experiences or even good work. Um, so uh, I think that when I found that out about myself, I was actually able in some ways to sort of unlock um, more potential and more creativity because I don't know if a lot. I mean, I'm sure every creative goes through this. It's like, oh, this thing that I made, this is like me and my baby, And it's like, no, dude, that's a trailer for this movie. It's like, don't touch it. It's like it's everything that it should be. And it's like, it's not. It's a piece of marketing material that like is supposed to motivate people to click on something. And not to diminish that, but it's like you kind of got to get outside of yourself and if you're only about like this one thing that you're trying to make, then you miss out on all the creative ways that it can develop, and you can then start listening to other people's input um, and feedback. So you know, there's a lot of things, and I would also like I'd also maybe make the analogy. I've been running a lot recently in the last year or so. Like I ran a 10K for the first time, like I think a month
Nice.
ago.
Congrats.
And the analogy I would make is like when I was running, starting out, like I would oftentimes get really like upset that I wasn't like hitting goals, right? And I was like, I want to be a runner, you know. But when I started being really successful in running and getting past like 1 mile, 2 miles, getting up to 4, 5, 6 miles, it's when like my mindset changed about like, oh, you're not reaching what you set out to do. It's like I started looking around and appreciating the run, like, oh, this is beautiful outside in California, and I'm breathing. Oh, my breathing is nourishing me. Like all of a sudden, like it wasn't hurting anymore, you know, and I was running faster, and I would look forward to it, you know. And I think that sometimes with your career, if you can let go of this idea of sort of whatever preconceived notions of what you are as an artist or creative, and sort of let it come to you, let the game come to you, so to speak. Um, you can find uh, that you're enjoying it a lot more, and you can unlock a lot more creativity and almost like an unlimited amount of creativity. Um, yeah, that's what I would tell myself. It would, if I had known that earlier on and was able to practice it, I think I would be have uh, had a little bit less anxiety, um, especially when I started at Netflix.
Yeah, dude, that is so. I mean, people should listen to that again because that is some people never learn that lesson, unfortunately, right? Is that we are not who we are is not wrapped up, and I'm going to say what you said. Who we are is not wrapped up in what we do, our titles, our jobs, like any of that stuff, right? We should be able to define who we are and understand our value outside of all those things.
Mm-hmm.
Each person has value just by existing. Whether you admit it or not, you have value just by existing. Once we start to attach those things to material objects, that's that's when we start to second guess. That's when our imposter syndrome shows up. That's when our
Right.
confidence goes down. That's where things become precious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what you were saying, where no, this is my edit. I spent all my time. I spent 30 hours on this V1, and I want to be the first to see V1 lock.
Right.
Never gonna happen, right? Never gonna happen. Um, so yeah, what you said is amazing. And for you to be able to realize that, I'm glad you realized that because it truly does unlock everything. It makes you a better person, makes you probably a better husband, better dad, better all the things because we're not getting in our own way. Right. And not saying that you were bad in any means before, but that thing, that doubt and that worry and that anxiety in the back of our heads is no longer there because we're just existing and we're providing value just by being present.
And all of a sudden, you're open to so many more things in life. You know, you talk about being a dad, like, and yeah, all that stuff informs your perspective when you are doing something creative. You know, um, so I think that if you can learn that early on, you can, you know, you can be happier and find and define sort of what your success is versus I don't know what everyone else thinks success is. You know, whether it be like something on your LinkedIn or being at some job or cutting a thing. You know, you're
Mhm.
just gonna be happier that way.
Yeah, it's interesting when I coach people, when I say, what does success look like? They usually have an answer, but the thing that I think is more eye-opening is how will you know when you get there and what would it feel like? Because
Mm,
that I think success is more of a feeling and a state of mind versus like accumulation of things, right? Because people may define success as, oh, I'm making $500,000 a year. I have the house with a white picket fence, 2.5 kids, a dog. Like, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that can be success. But if you don't feel successful, what does it mean to have those things?
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I remember like before I, you know, was let go at Netflix, when they did the layoffs. I talked to you a couple months before that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, just like, and I had this, you know, I was like, oh, great job, like finally bought a house, have a kid, like all these things that Netflix afforded me. But I was like, I kind of want to leave, man. Like, why did you leave? You know, and I needed some of that guidance because although that success, if you know, I remember like getting hit up by people from college and being like, how did you get into this thing? I was like, oh wow, people think of me as successful, but I don't feel that way, you know. And how do I then take control of my career from here on out? So yeah, I appreciate that conversation for sure.
Yeah, I remember. And yeah, it's so good to see where you are now and just the way you can reflect back um, and talk about that experience. Okay, last question. 'Cause I know we're at time.
Oh, sure.
This one's an easy one. So
Okay.
if people want to reach out to you and even see some of your work, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and connect and look at what you're getting into now?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way to do it. And you'll probably post some kind of link
Yep, in the show
for that
notes. Yep.
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I post like the things that I'm proud of on there. And there's also a website that I have. There's sort of two websites, romalejandro.com. That's more of my sort of filmmaking personal endeavors. And then I have samples at romalejandro.com/samples. So you'll see on there things that I've worked on recently that I really enjoy. But probably LinkedIn, because I'll give like context as to like who did I work with and when did this thing come out. That would be the place. And I also respond pretty well on LinkedIn as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, thank you, Ron, for taking the time. I really
Oh, so
appreciate
much
you.
fun. Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
believe that went by really fast.
Yeah. At time goes by, we probably could have kept talking for a long time because it's
Yeah,
just, just you and I, like we've talked much longer than
sure.
45 minutes before.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for staying on. And dude, I'd love to have you back.
Oh, for sure.
Maybe
Thank
like
you for having
next
me
year.
on. Yeah,
Yeah, of course. Of
awesome.
course. You're one of the first people I thought of when I was like, who would be great to have on here to just talk about their story, share their journey, like because you had a lot of things to talk about today. So if you should listen to this again, if you listen to it, because you talked about growing up as a minority in the South, the Asian American experience, struggles you've been through, and then mindset, like all of that, I think is helpful to people who are one trying to find their way in this industry, or two thinking about getting into this industry.
Hmm.
Like for better or worse, Hollywood, tech, just the creative space can be toxic. And if you don't have a
Yeah,
strong mindset, it'll eat you alive, right? So
for sure.
hopefully by listening to the story you have and some of the things that we've talked about today, it'll help people have the right expectations, set themselves up for success, and don't let that success be defined by other people, but
Hmm.
defined by what we want to be successful and how we feel when we are there. So yeah, thanks again.
That's awesome.
If you're listening, check out the book. I dropped a book recently. It'll be linked in the show notes. Creative, was it The 7-Figure Leader? Unleash Leadership Excellence. Thanks again, Rom, for taking the time.
Oh,
I
thank you.
appreciate you.
So much
Yeah.
fun. We'll do it
Have an
again for
amazing
sure.
week. Yeah, we'll definitely do it again. All right. Have an amazing week and
Thanks.
take care. We'll see you all next time.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to Creative Leadership with Heart. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It'll help make sure that you get notified every time there's new episodes that are coming out. And if you want to connect with me, check me out at riconasol.com. All right, all. Have a good one.